Mueller turns up no collusion. So where do Democrats go from here? I'm Joel Kurtnitis.
And I'm Josh Hugo.
And you're listening to Constructive Interference. So, the Mueller investigation, and by the way, Josh, I can barely bring myself to say Mueller because it's spelled M-U-E. Shouldn't that be Mueller?
Like totally my whole be life. Mueller, like a cat.
It's gotta be Mueller.
Like that.
Something. Mueller would not have an E before the L's. Anyway, grammar Nazi aside here, that the investigation is now history. And make no mistake, it's going to make the history books. I mean, history, as they say, is written by the victor. So right now, and the political cycle that we're in the season that we're in, we're sort of determining whether this will go down as a push for more integrity and transparency in government or just a cynical power grab through the legal process when, people can't win elections anymore. They go this route instead. I'm sure we will get into those opinions as to which of those it is later on, but this investigation could well be one of the defining. I mean, I don't know. I was just thinking about it today. It could be one of the things that defines Trump's administration, and that would be true whether it was true or false, right? I mean, the scandals tend to define administrations, whether they're true or false, and have historically. And so this could leave a mark far beyond what we even know now, even if it is, complete trumped up bogus nonsense, which a lot of it. After what we found out in the report and what we expect to find out based on some Justice Department observations, maybe just that.
Well, I don't. I mean, definitely it's going to leave a mark, but I'm not sure that it really counts as a Trump scandal, because, like I said, if as it now seems, Mueller found nothing, then really the scandal is more on the part of the investigators and the media, don't you think?
Well, in a fair reckoning of history, I think that would be the case. The question now is, will he get a fair reckoning in history? Because especially as we've seen, the academic world's a little bit divorced from the rest of our worlds, and so the people that are going to be writing these books, it's up to them whether they want to say, well, Trump was exonerated and everybody cleared him and everything turned out to be hunky-dory and, the bad guys got what was coming to them, or whether they, decide to say, well, 2 years of investigations produced this many indictments and this many convictions, and there was rampant corruption throughout the administration that handicapped it. And, there's ways to do this, right? There's ways to propagandize it. So we'll just have to see. But for anybody that hasn't been following, the long-awaited Mueller report was released.
Mueller.
I know. I can't. I don't know which way is correct, and I'm just tired of correcting other people when I'm not sure myself. So, it was released to the Justice Department, who's now holding it in a classified manner. That seems to be where the debate is now. Whether the full text of the report will be released to the public. There has been a vote in the House of Representatives, passed 422-0 in favor of releasing the report. Josh, you said Trump's in favor of releasing it too, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the president's in favor, the House is in favor. It has died at the hands of Mitch McConnell, like many other worthy things. So at the moment, it's stuck in the Senate. We'll see if that changes sometime in the near future. But I think the story right now, especially for anybody that's more on the right of the political spectrum, is the reaction to the findings of the report, or more, I think more correctly, the lack of findings in the report. It's been astonishing. It has just been astonishing to see how upset people are that our president did not collude with the Russians. I don't know what to make of that. It's really baffling to me to see people on the verge of tears talking about, well, Trump is not going to, be found guilty of collusion with the Russians and stealing elections and conspiracy and impeached and removed from office.
Well, it's wouldn't you be worried about that? Like, oh my goodness, I'm really worried. What if our president is a Russian agent? Wouldn't that be just awful? I hope that's not true. That's what you'd expect, but you've seen the opposite. Instead of people being relieved, oh, I'm relieved that Trump's not a Russian agent. That makes me happy inside. Yay. Instead, you're seeing oh, rats. I was really hoping he was. They were going to nail him. It's like, what? Who hopes that the leader of their country is a foreign agent?
I guess people whose domestic agendas are being badly beaten by said president. I don't know. It's crazy though. I mean, just looking at the reactions to this from the left, from Democrats, they are in some cases just despondent that Trump is not being impeached and removed from office, that this whole thing didn't turn out the way they wanted. I think there was a lot of false hope played up by the media these last couple of years, that and not just hope. It was the rhetoric that was repeated over and over again that the Trump presidency, for one reason or another, was illegitimate. And a lot of, passionate Democrats and liberals and leftists were, I believe, really hoping and really expecting that was true, and that his presidency was going to be overturned, and that he was going to be investigated and removed from office, and all of their dreams would come true in this regard. And that's not going to happen now. And so it leaves Democrats in a very, very difficult place. And that's some of what we're going to talk about tonight. The reactions have ranged from, I guess you have the more emotional side where people are crying or becoming enraged, but you also have people who are kind of the typical pundits that you would expect. And of course, the politicians in the Democratic Party that are insisting that this is not the end. And the theories that are coming around now are just straight up crazy. I mean, just now people are talking about having another congressional investigator go after Mueller to see if there's a cover up there. That was my favorite one. Did you hear any other ones, Josh?
Nothing that specific, but yeah, just the idea that, well, the Mueller report he didn't prove that Trump isn't a Russian agent, which of course, how could you prove that? It's like, prove you're not a witch.
Right.
Joel, can you prove you're not a witch?
Well, I float.
Well, there you go. Circumstantial evidence, you are guilty. But yeah, it's like, I haven't said anything that specific, but just the idea that just because this 2-year, $25 million investigation didn't find anything, well, that doesn't mean there's nothing. There still could be truth lurking, someplace under Trump's couch cushions or whatever. We need to look in the right spot, and we'll find Putin's fingerprints on his ashtray if we just look. But
yeah, and there are a lot of people who are talking about, which is valid, right? It's legitimate to say that there might be other things uncovered in the report that are not collusion with the Russians that still might cause trouble or might bring some other people down within the campaign or the administration. That's fair, right? I mean, I honestly, I don't know, having worked for a couple presidential campaigns, I don't know one that you couldn't get for one scandal or another. Right. I mean, it's just they're very sloppy, hastily organized affairs, working with a lot of volunteers who do not have complete and exhaustive knowledge of campaign law. Almost no one does. And yet things have to happen and come together very quickly. So I don't have any doubt that there's things in there that could be used to still damage the president and the administration. But I just don't think it's going to be all they hope it will.
Well, I mean, the people who have been indicted, like Cohen and Manafort and all them, all the Trump associates that have been convicted or sent to jail, they were all sent to jail just for doing very generic, very unglamorous criminal things like money laundering or lying on forms, or not declaring certain associations they had. But all of it was just like really petty, really boring, insipid lawyer sleaze stuff that you just kind of expect. You think you go to Washington, you just find sleazy lawyers who are manipulating the system. That's kind of what you expect to find there. That's what Mr. Smith found when he went there back in the day. And
that was before Michael Avenatti.
Yes. Oh yeah, that's more news today. But
there's a punchline for another day.
Yes. But that's all pretty much. All the Mueller investigation found, all the Mueller investigation really found is just that, hey, what do you know? Washington is full of corrupt, sleazy lawyers. Check it out. And I'm just
right. None of them, so far as we know, beholden to the Kremlin.
Yeah. I'm not even sure really how that's really bad for Trump, because I would expect that if you investigated like any of these long-term congressmen, anybody who's had a presidential campaign, anyone who's been in Congress for multiple terms, I'm sure they have some connections to some sleazy lawyers. Because
doubtless. Doubtless. I mean, and this is what libertarians have been screaming about for ages too, right? It's a good old boys club. All of Washington and all of these, they all know each other. They're all buddies. They all go to the same golf courses. They all go to the same parties, and there's a lot of closet deals in there that, frankly, don't have a lot of divisions between party lines. But as we look at lists, as we look at kind of the reactions to this, I thought that was really interesting. There's a CNN article that I saw earlier today that discussed the fact that the report, for better or worse, really did not have much, if any, effect on public opinion. And now, of course, the text of that has not been released yet. So if it turns out that there's some giant bombshell in there that we don't know about, that could change, right? But this is a CNN. Well, I hate myself for finding a source from CNN instead of Fox News who actually did the poll, but this is where I came across it first. Fox News poll released on Sunday that was conducted before Mueller submitted the report and Barr released his summary had similar results. 8 in 10 voters want the report to be available to the public. So the public's pretty solid on wanting the report released. However, check this out. Over half of registered voters approve of Mueller's investigation. 45% said they trusted Mueller to tell the truth on Russia versus 29% who trust Trump. And then the poll also showed that 53% of Americans said that they think most of what the president has said about the investigation has been false. But about 4 in 10 voters in the Fox News poll out Sunday said there's no chance at all that something in the report could make them change their minds. 40%. So 40% of people came out and said, it does not matter what's in the report. I will never change my mind. It doesn't matter. So, and this is something this is a phenomenon that we've seen in the Kavanaugh hearings. This is something that we've seen in some high profile criminal cases as well. People form their opinions before any of the evidence has been collected and has been thrown out there. And there was there's kind of a summary quote by Bill Maher, I guess, or Bill Maher. I don't know how you say his name either. Bill Maher, sure. So he said basically, I don't need to see what's in the report. I have a TV. I can't really fathom that kind of ignorance. That just seems like such an ignorant statement to me. That in other words, I'm so convinced by what I see, Lester Holt discussing about the Trump administration that I don't really care what an investigator paid $25 million to spend 2 years investigating came up with. I mean, can you imagine that? Isn't that arrogant as well as ignorant? Well, that's a dangerous combination.
Yeah, I mean, you say that. That sounds, I mean, the word that comes to my mind is dead, because who doesn't change their mind? Dead people don't change their minds. They're deaf. And you hear people say that whole mindset, don't give me the facts, I already made up my mind. It's like, if you're going to be closed-minded like that, where what's coming into you from the world, what you gain with your senses isn't going to affect you, then why do you bother getting up and like looking at stuff? It's like, that's disturbing to me. I mean, that to me is like a frightening mindset. It's like, if you've already decided that new information coming into me is not going to change me, it's not going to affect me. It's like, that's like being a zombie, man. That's scary.
It is. And by the way, lest you think we're just being partisan here, it's not that 4 in 10 voters, there was very little difference between the parties. So out of that group, 4 in 10 said that there's no chance at all that something in the report would make them change their mind. 29%, another 30 said there's only a small chance that anything in the report would change. So that's 70% of people say there's little or no chance that anything in that report could change their minds. That's unbelievable to me. And so you can gather from that there was only a small percentage that said it might. Now, here's the party breakdown. Democrats, this again according to the CNN article, Democrats were steadfast in their opinions on Trump. 47% reported there was no chance at all that they would change their minds about him. Nearly 40% of Republicans and 27% of independents said the same thing. So independents, making us proud here, only a quarter of you said that only about a quarter of independents said that they wouldn't change their mind about Trump no matter what was in the report. But Republicans and Democrats, man, it's half. We're talking about half of these gigantic groups of people, groups of voters in the U.S. have basically said, we don't care about the facts. We don't care what's going on here. Our minds have already been made up. And that, I think, is the source. And this was kind of the initial reaction I had, was just sadness when I saw all of these reactions to this released report. I just had an incredible amount of sadness, thinking I can't imagine having being so sure that you're right about something like this, and then finding out that you're wrong, and not knowing where to go with it. I just can't imagine starting at a conclusion and then working backwards, against the tide of evidence, and then still being surprised by something like this at the point that you're just destitute and despondent when you find out that your dreams are not going to play out. I mean, who wants to live that way? Who wants to operate a political party that way?
Well, no one. That's why. But people don't think that they're doing that. People, It's something that I thought of years ago. Just observing, not from observing politics, but just observing various people I interacted with. Is that I really think that a person can make themselves crazy. And let's stop here and define what I mean by crazy. When I say crazy, I mean a person whose thinking is detached from the world, who has sort of their own reality that is not contingent upon the shared reality that we all experience. That's what I mean by crazy. Um, and I'm convicted that a person can drive themselves nuts, make themselves crazy so that they no longer perceive reality accurately just by consistently lying to themselves. And I think, I mean, you see that in cults, or extremist groups. And scarily, I think we're starting to see it in more, mainstream, larger bodies here. And I think it's kind of the phenomenon we're seeing is you have these people who have sort of self-indoctrination, we'll call it, where people, yes, by the media they consume, by the people they talk to, but also just by their own internal self-reassurance, have detached themselves from reality. And that's when you say there are these people who are willing to say to a pollster that no matter what the evidence is, they're not changing their minds. It's like that's getting to that level. That's getting to the point where I can say, okay, well that's actually not metaphorically, but is actually crazy. Because if a person is genuinely like that, genuinely is not going to change their mind no matter what the evidence is, and they're willing to say so, then that is a person who is not experiencing reality at that point. And goodness, I hope we aren't getting to that point.
Well, and there's a lot of interesting psychological studies about people who believe conspiracy theories, and I probably have had a disproportionate amount of exposure to that since I've had a lot of dealings with libertarians. But
Hey.
you'll see I consider myself a libertarian, but you'll see a lot of confirmation bias in these types of things where people arrive at a conclusion, usually based on a prior pattern of thinking, some from other built up issues, and they'll arrive at a conclusion, and then they'll just work backward from there, and just everything that comes in, just got to grab and to fit and substantiate and justify a view that you held already. And the problem is, and this is what the libertarians have showcased wonderfully, is that most of the time that tendency to do that makes you politically irrelevant, because it does cut you off from a broader reasoning portion of society. Now, that's not to say it's always wrong. It's not always wrong. Clearly, there have been times, and I think the Snowden revelations were a great example of that, where you're not paranoid if they're really after you, right? Like there has been conspiracy exposed, and that happens.
Well, yeah, but just to clarify, there, saying that some conspiracies are actually real is not validating that conspiracy thinking mindset, though. So yeah, I mean, sometimes they're really out to get you, but it's always still bad to work backwards that way from your conclusion.
Right, absolutely. And so what we're looking at here, and it's not our intent at all to be condescending or to be harsh towards people who are Democrats or people who are liberals. I have a lot of friends that are in this category, family even, and I just want to kind of look around and have a dialogue about where does the Democratic Party go from here? I mean, where do you go? Because this was kind of the great white hope of the Democrats on the national scale. They lost the 2016 election. They've been consistently, now before losing the presidency, they were consistently getting thumped in state elections all over the country, lost a ton of governorships, really became uncompetitive in large swaths of America, and sort of hoped that wouldn't matter because they controlled a couple of large metropolises that could turn the federal government around. That hasn't panned out so far. And so now the question has to be asked electorally, where do we go from this? I mean, are the Democrats going to continue down this road? And when I say this road, I'm talking about the rhetoric, and I'm talking about the priorities, the policy priorities of the party, because where they go electorally is going to be determined by that, right? We've got a little bit of time before the next election. I mean, the primaries are already underway, sure, but we've got a little bit of time before that general election. They've got time to define themselves. And I think that many within that party were expecting to define themselves by this report and by the sinking of Trump for corruption and all these other things. With that out of the picture, so far as we know anyway, where do they go next?
Well, I mean, we were kind of talking about this before we started recording, and the Democrats kind of brand themselves as being rebels. I'm thinking, going back to even to the 1960s, when the Democrats, back when they were, of course they aren't now, but back when the Democrats actually were, an anti-war party, and rebelling against the man who wanted to send everybody to Vietnam was sort of a rallying point. Back when the Democrats, they talk about things like nuclear disarmament. They talk about things like ending war, ending the draft, all these things that were sort of anti-establishment and were considered by the people at the time to be, radical or anti-American.
Sure.
But I'm thinking of like the feminist movement, from what it was 100 years ago to what it is now, or the civil rights movement from what it was 50 years ago to what it was now, and the Democratic Party in general. These things are all based upon change, upon one wanting. Of course, Obama's campaign slogan was change, not by accident. But these movements are all based upon change. They're all based upon the idea of there is some sort of an evil power that needs to be thwarted, and we need to replace the evil power with its evil rules, with better rules and a better system. Well, the thing is, at this point in history, in 2019, anything that mainstream Democrats really ever wanted to do is more or less accomplished. They got Obamacare, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all these entitlement programs continue to expand. Federal budgets continue to go up all the time. The government continues to expand. And, we even have things like in some cities experimenting with things like universal basic income.
Free college tuition in New York.
Yeah, right. Free college tuition. I mean, they got gay marriage through the Supreme Court. New York passed their infanticide bill, even saying that having abortion up until while the woman is in labor is acceptable. And several states like Illinois and Virginia have tried to follow suit. So really anything that a mainstream Democrat would have wanted even like 10 years ago, it's pretty much been done. And it just seems to me, so you ask, where do we go from here? Well, I think when you have a movement that is based upon the sort of rebellious agenda, based upon the idea of change, well, after the movement has accomplished all of its changes, after it's gotten everything that it wanted, you have two options. After you've gotten everything you want, you can either say, okay, the movement is done now. We won, we're finished. The movement is now going to disband, and we'll all go home and drink a beer or whatever. You can do that, or you
go
can
to the Winchester and wait for all this to blow over.
Yes. I got that reference.
One of my favorite movies, by the way.
But so you can do that. So you can go drink a beer at the Winchester, or you can make up some new stuff to go after. So like I'll take to say feminism, for instance. Now the feminism of 100 years ago, I'll just say I think was respectable.
I'm not sure you have a right to talk about this because you don't have a uterus.
How do you know? What if I identify as having a uterus? I know that's all right. Tangents, but
science.
Yeah, you said you consider yourself a libertarian. I'll just come out and say I consider myself a libertarian. Also, come out of the not that I was really in the closet, but come out of the closet if I was in one. And so, as a libertarian, I believe that women should definitely have equal legal standing with men, because I believe in the supremacy of the individual as a political unit, as a libertarian. And the feminism of the past, the feminism of 100 years ago, was basically focused around that idea of political equality, that if a man could legally do something, then a woman should be able to do it too. And that has been accomplished. I'm not sure exactly when it was accomplished was, but let's just be generous and say as of at least 50 years ago in America, that was the case. And we've had like generations now, 2, 3, maybe even 4 or more generations of people who have grown up with the original goals of feminism having been accomplished. It's like feminism, as far as what it was 100 years ago, 150 years ago, it won. The feminists won. They got everything they wanted, but feminism didn't go away at that point. It's not like the feminists said, okay, well, we got the vote, we got equal property rights, we got equal everything with men now, so we're going to go home and we'll just be happy. It's like, no, they've just made up new things to get mad about. Like we have this, for instance, this hoax, this fraudulent, silly idea of the wage gap that you hear complained about constantly, even to this day, even though it's been proven to be a myth so many times.
Mm-hmm.
You have this thing. You have these some women. Anytime there's the possibility of any sort of restriction on abortion, you have women will dress up in the Handmaid's Tale outfits to go protest this. So feminism, when the feminists won, and I do think that's good. I think the original feminists, the original ones who wanted legal equality, they should have won. I'm glad they did. But the thing is, they won, but the feminism didn't disappear. It evolved, and as it evolved, they had to keep making up new things to go for. Mm-hmm. And it just kept getting crazier and crazier. And it's gotten now to the point where people who are feminists in 2019 think that, for example, any sort of restriction on abortion whatsoever is going to send us back to the days when men would, burn down a village and take the women by their hair as booty.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think it's the either or thing. So as to conclude this little rant, it's like, where do we go? It's like, well, when you've accomplished your goals, you can either go home or you can go crazy. And the Democratic Party, from my perception, being based upon these ideas of rebellion and change, I mean, they don't really have anywhere to go except toward crazy.
That's one of the most quotable things that you've said on this show. Go home or go crazy. I like it. I like it. I think, yeah, right on. Copyright it. Insert the J. Jonah Jameson right here. I want a quarter every time somebody says it. No, there's so I agree, and I think that there's a clear theme here, because when I look at the position, the thing that you just laid out, the process that you just laid out, I'm thinking, who stands to gain from what? Because if you have a mission and you accomplish that mission and you go home, it's like what we talk about with war, right? With foreign intervention. If we accomplish the mission and go home, then the profits are capped. That's it. We do what we were going to do, and then we go home, and it's over, and everything goes back to normal. And all the people who were profiting from that conflict no longer get to profit from it. And that's unacceptable to a lot of people. So they have to maintain conflict all the time, because there are people who benefit from conflict, and there are people who profit from conflict. And just the same, I think it's the same way on a political level. If you have especially civil rights issues, if you have a civil rights issue that at one time was completely valid, and you accomplish those goals, what are you going to do? Just dry up and go away? Shut down your doors? Fire all your people? Send them home? Well, no, because it's an industry and you have to keep those people employed. They have families, by golly. And so that's when you find new villains. If you're a hero without a villain, have you ever seen the movie Megamind?
No.
Megamind is a great movie, one of the more underrated animated films of our time, I believe. But you have a supervillain who, for the sake of not getting into too much exposition here, you have a supervillain who succeeds in killing his nemesis, the superhero. And then he takes over the city and ruins it and destroys it and steals all the money and does everything he wants and drives everyone into bondage and oppression. And then he finds that he's incredibly bored and can't stand his life because he has no opposition anymore. There's no challenge to him. He just goes and does whatever he wants, and no one cares. They just go about their daily routines and try to stay out of his way. And he ends up creating a new superhero to fill the gap in his life of a villain, as a villain. And then that superhero ends up becoming a villain. And it's just a really intriguing picture of kind of what's going on. And I think that's what's going on here, is once we get rid of the villains, we have a hole in our lives. We have to get rid of, we have to get rid of that feeling. And so we create more villains so that we can continue to feel needed. But how does Russiagate fit into this? So Russiagate, as it has now come to a kind of a grinding halt, how does that fit into what you're talking about?
Well, I guess Trump has been the villain just to a ridiculous extent.
He makes a good one, though. You got to admit,
he does make a good villain. I'm sure this will offend all of our Trump, our MAGA audience, but Trump is
all not, 5 of them.
Yeah, Trump is not a likable guy. I would say Trump is kind of a hateable guy. He fulfills that sleazy, arrogant billionaire archetype so well, with his supermodel, his rotation of model wives who he cheats on, just his whole arrogance, the fact that he used to, have you seen pictures of his apartment in Trump Tower that he used to live in?
I have not.
You should look it up. Look up, just Google Trump apartment, Trump Tower. He lived basically in the. He made a palace for himself. Everything was gold and marble, and it was hideously ugly, but very expensive. And that's So where was I going with this? Oh yeah, Trump is hateable. Oh yeah. So, but as far as his being a villain, I mean, do you remember, Joel, when Trump was first inaugurated and some vandals went up behind the White House like on a crane and put a giant resist banner behind him?
I do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that resist hashtag has still been a thing. And with Trump being called, a fascist and a Nazi, and saying that his election was like an attack on our country and all these things that we've heard said, he has just been made up to be just a supervillain. Let's put it that way. It's like the Democrats have made Trump out to be a supervillain, and for the last 2 years, they basically justified their existence by saying that they are fighting the supervillain. I remember
they're the resistance.
Yes, yes, exactly. The Democrats are the resistance, and Trump is Emperor Palpatine, sending out his stormtroopers, and that's the picture they've painted.
Right, which is why so many people have been thrown into concentration camps here in the U.S. in the last 4 years, right, or 2 years. I guess.
Oh yeah, I mean, we almost was thrown in the Trump camps. I mean,
right, and that's before the Great Famine started. Where millions have been herded to their deaths. I mean, that's what I've seen since Trump got elected. Right.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right after the internet died from net neutrality going away.
Yeah. Before that, I mean, I used to like using the internet too. And like all my black neighbors in my neighborhood, how they can't live here anymore because of the segregation came back. All that stuff that Trump did. It's just really terrible now.
Yep, absolutely. It's this might be the last broadcast we get to do.
Yes,
freedom of the press has been revoked. The press have now been declared the enemy of the people. So we're as podcasters, we're now enemies of the people. And
definitely. But that scenario that we just described, that laughable, ridiculous scenario that hasn't happened at all, that's pretty much what the commentators on the left, the Rachel Maddows and the Maxine Waters, who of course isn't a commentator so much, but that's the sort of image they've been putting
forth. She's a special tater.
Yeah, special tater. That's
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
The dad puns, they have.
I will never say you never gave me anything. You gave me that pun. But yeah, so it's like, so Trump is their supervillain who's going to end the world, like Darkseid, after he defeats Superman or whatever, is going to end the world. And, with the dropping of the Mueller report, it's like they're afraid they're going to lose that. Kind of like that. I mean, that Megamind movie sounds so interesting to me now. But yeah, it's like, so
yes,
you've lost your opposition. Like, what do you do now? What's your
should
purpose?
Definitely check that out.
I will.
And I agree with you. I think at this point, a lot of Democrats feel like they have to keep doubling down on stupidity and doubling down on extreme rhetoric, because if they don't, then they're just going to lose completely. I think that's what they really believe. And I think they believe that any retreat is a surrender at this point.
Well, are they wrong?
And, well, yeah, I mean, I think so. I think honest, reasonable people should be able to turn around in the face of contrary evidence and say, hey, I thought this was going to be the case. This has turned out not to be the case. I don't think that makes me wrong about everything, but in order to be reasonable, it's okay to say I'm wrong about this thing so that I can move on to benefit the country in better ways. And the visual that I get on this, so I just introduced, I'm going to do another, y'all should get the idea that I watch a lot of animated movies these days. I had my kids watch the original Jungle Book. And
good stuff.
This scene, I believe you will certainly remember when at the end, when Shere Khan is chasing Mowgli and Baloo's got him by the tail and he's trying to hang on for dear life by the tail. And then the tiger like runs the other way and like tangles Baloo up in his own legs. And he's like being dragged behind this tiger. And the vultures come up and say, hey, we got him safe and you can let go, Baloo. And he's like, no, are you kidding me? There's teeth in the other end. That's what the Democrats, I think, are feeling right now. They're being dragged all over the place by Trump and by the administration. And they feel like at this point, they can't let go, even though they're in a terrible, terrible position. They can't let go of that tail because there's teeth in the other end, And so I feel like that's where we're at, is that I feel like you have this and I don't know, maybe it's just human nature, but I don't know if they know how to back down from this.
Well, I mean, there's such a thing as being in a corner. it's really tough. It's really tough after you've used that extreme sort of rhetoric. After you've spent the last 2 years literally saying that Donald Trump is causing hate crimes around the world because he emboldens white supremacists and he likes it. And he knows he does. I saw an old tweet from Maxine Waters today. It was from 2017, where Maxine Waters referred to the Kremlin clan, with K's.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I'll define that and link it. But so after you spent the last 2 years talking about the Kremlin clan, how do you back down from that? Because what's the sunk cost fallacy? I don't know if that applies here, but there's a point where you've invested so much of yourself, of your own self-image, in a narrative that if you then turn away from that and admit the narrative was foolish, then you make yourself seem foolish and you lose your own credibility. And so, like you said, I think that's kind of the place where you're at here. It's like, I got the tiger by the tail. Now, how do I let go? If I let go, then yeah. So I don't know what you do about that, because, I mean, it's funny to say. It's like, oh, look, they're so dumb. They got the tiger by the tail. But these are people who are making policy, who make laws, and who have real power, and people who are media figures who have real power over what people think. And I don't know, you talk about the idea of people with that level of power having a tiger by the tail. That seems kind of discomforting to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, what would you say, Josh, if I asked you what is the number one virtue that is missing from general American political rhetoric? If you just had to pick one.
That'll be a tie between grace and humility.
Yeah. Well, you captured one of the ones I was going to say there. Humility. Humility is completely gone. It's just evaporated. And it's been replaced by this smug confidence. And by the way, this is a nonpartisan thing. I mean, what I cringe that this is why people can't stand to hear politicians talk. The arrogance, and no matter, you can never be wrong. You might have been mistaken. You might have had alternate facts. Whatever happens, you can never be wrong unless there's no other way out. And I just wish that wasn't the case. I think it's so diametrically opposed to the rest of us who on a daily basis have to, talk to our bosses or our spouses or everybody else. Say, you know what, that was really stupid of me. I'm really sorry. I messed up. I really thought this was going to happen. It didn't. And without that, how do you, if you can't run a family without that, how do you run a government? How do you run a nation without that? But I do believe, if this is only one thing, the Russiagate piece is only one component here, because like you said, there's a lot of other policies that are going straight to crazy town. I mean, so the Russian collusion thing has fallen through. We've got the abortion extremism that you mentioned earlier. You've got the Green New Deal. You've got all sorts of other crazy stuff that's coming out right now that, and I'm not using this as a pejorative. I'm just saying, these are issues that either one are so outlandish and so expensive that they could not be funded and could not be implemented no matter what we did as a country tomorrow. Or two, they represent such a small, a tiny, tiny fraction of the Democratic base and of the American public that I don't understand how they're going to be politically viable in any circumstance. So when we talk about, where do the Democrats go from here? At some point, they're going to have a vision that appeals to the majority of America. Now, Trump, as ridiculous as he can be on a lot of things, he did present a coherent vision. And that coherent vision, whether, I'm not sure, I probably can't credit him with that, but at least his speechwriters and handlers did, a vision of, hey, let's bring jobs back, let's restart industry, and let's make America great again. That was his vision. And it was something that was a positive vision. I firmly believe if he had just run on, I'm the anti-Obama, I don't think he'd have had a chance to get in office. People may talk negatively like that. It's like when you're well, Josh, you're in IT, you know this. When you're giving somebody code, when you're developing something for somebody, they never know what they want until they have something to criticize. That's the customer doesn't know what they want, and that's the same thing here. Is that nobody knew what they wanted in a president, but they knew they didn't want Obama, and now they don't know what they want in a president, but they know they don't want Trump, and it's sort of just human nature. But unfortunately, in this case, we don't have that vision presented by the other side. And by the way, I might be on the right side of the political column, or the right political column, but I see value in a strong Democratic Party. And here's the reason. I don't want single party dominance in American politics. I don't. I mean, if we changed our electoral system to where we have, more coalitions and smaller third parties, all that stuff, sure, that's fine.
Ranked choice.
But in the way that it's set up right now, I don't want single party dominance, because I've seen the Republicans go crazy too and do stupid things. I've seen them, go full on board with the military industrial complex and go policing overseas and to the point that the Democrats have followed suit. But here's what I'm talking about. The Democrats on these issues that most Americans do care about, they're lockstep with the Republicans on those. Like you said earlier, when it comes to taxing and spending, where's the daylight between them on tax and spend? I haven't seen any. I mean, so on the things that we relied on the Democrats to really put the brakes on the Republicans when they got out of control, they're not effective at those things anymore. The only places where they'll actually stand and fight are the things that either nobody cares about or they're just completely outlandish, like this Green New Deal. I mean, and so what do you do? I mean, is there even a path to viability?
I think cow farts are a much less attractive supervillain than the evil billionaire, I must say.
Yep, that's cow farts. Cow farts is a supervillain. That's got to be like a Seth Rogen movie in the works.
No, man, that's real life.
Oh, gracious. Gracious.
A path to viability? I don't know. I've seen... I don't know. It's like, I guess, what do Republicans as a party stand for? And you ask what either party stands for, I guess in my mind, it's super vague. They both have these really vague, sort of broad, sketchy ideas.
Sure.
But generally speaking, you'd say the Republicans, at least what they want you to think they stand for, is family values, which you mean, traditional families, usually imagined as some sort of a weird 50s illustration. Strength, military strength, law and order. That's the sort of things that they want to stand for, which are all things with broad appeal. There are exceptions, of course, nowadays, but generally speaking, there are very few people who actually would oppose law and order and say, well, no, we don't want that, who oppose traditional families, or who actually, would say that they oppose having a strong military with a protected country. Those are things with broad appeal. But what do Democrats stand for that distinguishes them? Like you said, Joel, on most of those issues that have broad appeal, they're lockstep with the Republicans. The places where they stand out are sort of these crazy things, like the Green New Deal, like talking about reparations, where there's somehow reparations. Yeah. Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren both have come out, two of the Democratic candidates for 2020 both come out saying they support this idea of reparations, which is, I'm not going to go into exactly why, but I'll just say it's a absolutely crazy idea.
Well, I think we should get into it a little bit, okay, just to sort of outline the extent, where this is going right now. What does that really entail? What does reparations actually entail for people?
No one knows.
Well, in theory, this would mean that people who are whose families at one point in our history have been harmed by practices or policies that happened in America, notably slavery, would be able to collect for those damages from us, right?
Who's us?
From everyone, pretty much.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, you want me to like why is that idea crazy? Well, the idea is crazy, for one, because how on earth could you possibly quantify damages if my ancestor 150 years ago, or 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, if my father, let's even say, it's maybe even closer than that, if my dad suffered some injustice, how can you possibly, in a system, in an economy, and society as dynamic and as mobile as the American system, how could you possibly say that I suffered any particular monetary damage from something that happened to my dad? You can't say that. You can't quantify that. And how would you say who owes? I mean, people who advocate reparations seem to have this really, really simplistic view where, we'll just have all the white people pay all the black people. But that doesn't make any sense, because there was the Civil War. We know about that, right? I mean, I hope hopefully all the listeners know about this war that happened, in the in the 1860s.
Right.
But like, who do you think was fighting on the northern side? It's like there was a bunch of white people north were fighting against slavery, and there are huge
interesting historical fact: more free blacks fought for the South in the war than the North. Free blacks, by the way.
And why do you suppose that is? This is a huge tangent here. Why would more free blacks have fought for the South than the North? Is it because they supported slavery? No, it's because you just fight for your home. And there were more free blacks happened to be living in the South, so they fought for their home. And that's honestly the case for most of the people fighting in the South. This is a huge tangent. We can't go on a civil. How much time do we have left in this? We can't go on a big civil.
No. That's a topic for another episode. Whenever both of us feel like getting banned from social media.
Oh yeah, let's go for that.
That'll get you banned for sure. If that don't get you banned, nothing will.
Yeah.
No. But I follow what you're saying with that, and I think when you get to some of these concepts and these ideas that we keep calling crazy, they don't have that broad appeal. They're not establishing a vision that I can look to and say, this is what my generation can relate to and can grab a hold of. And when I look at things, when people talk about millennials now, they've finally, thank God, stopped referring to us as high schoolers. We're not high schoolers anymore. We're buying homes. We're developing properties, we're developing careers, we're building families, we have kids, we're families now.
We're adulting.
And so we're adulting. And so if you see, the Democratic Party going for the millennial vote, sure, they've got a built-in advantage with millennials where it's well documented that our age group is much more liberal than prior age groups, much less liberal, by the way, than the subsequent one. But this is not what's going to do it. Like, you have people who have real concerns about their jobs and their bills and their homes and their health care. Oh, God help their health care, man. And these are not, like, none of that is going to be helped by a $93 trillion spending bill that's called the Green New Deal, which, by the way, includes a lot of things that have nothing to do with climate change at all, because the Democrats have been outspoken about the fact that they see this as an opportunity for wealth redistribution. I mean, who's going to vote for that? Who are you gonna who's Beto gonna stand up in front of a crowd and get cheers for, hey, let's redistribute wealth by banning cow farts and spending $93 trillion? Like, who runs on that kind of thing? And same with reparations. I mean, all of these things. Now, I understand every party plays to their base in the primaries, right? Because you got to beat the primary, you got to win the primary to get in the general, and of course you're gonna traditional political wisdom is that you're going to play all the way to your base during the primary. But still, some of these things are so extreme and so harmful, I can't see anyone shaking them off in the general election. And I don't want to caricature the Democratic Party, but it seems like in some of these things, the caricature, it's caricaturing itself. There's not anything I can do with this. And so if it leads us to the question, if you're a reasonable person in the Democratic Party, what do you do? Like, do you run as someone, run for office and on a state or local level or even on the national level and say, I am a Democrat and I believe in these liberal policies, but I disagree with the extent to which my party has embraced these extreme elements, and I think we need to get back to common sense and helping average Americans. I mean, what do you do? Do you engage in direct activism and go to town halls and talk to your liberal representatives like Maxine Waters and say, what are you doing? You're making us sound completely insane. I mean, what do you do in that situation? Because I think that the answer to that question will kind of determine the political landscape that we have going forward, and to what extent we'll be able to, and this is, I think, the serious part, to what extent we'll be able to continue to rely on these democratic institutions to move our election process forward, to move our country forward, to move our government forward, without completely undermining that trust and seeking to illegitimize every election, which I think is the path that we're on right now, unless something changes. But you know what? That's what we think about it. Let us know what you think this week. We're going to be joining the discussion on social media. Is the Democratic Party going to return to national viability in 2020? Or are they just going to give more ground? Can they win back middle America with the issues they're running on now? Do you expect to see them moderate over the next few months to a couple years? Which Democratic candidate for president do you think, well, originally I was going to say is the least crazy, but who do you think has the best chance of pulling the party in the right direction? And if you're a reasonable Democrat, we want to hear from you on these things. So make sure you join the discussion. Head over to facebook.com/TheCI Show and hit us up on Twitter @TheCI Show. And thanks for listening. We will talk to you next week. You're listening to Constructive Interference.